The courtroom doors creaked open, and every head turned. A young black man stepped in, no lawyer, no tie, just a gray hoodie and steady eyes that refused to drop. The judge leaned forward with a sneer. "Another one playing tough," he muttered loud enough for the courtroom to hear. A few people laughed, but the man said nothing. He reached slowly into his pocket, not for a weapon, for a badge, a golden FBI badge. Silence. "Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below." The story of Darius Cole did not begin in a courtroom. It began on the south side of Chicago, where sirens sang louder than lullabies and the corner stores closed before sunset. His mother, Janice, worked 2 nursing jobs to keep the lights on. His father was a name only spoken in hushed tones, gone long before Darius could remember the shape of his voice. As a boy, Darius learned early how to make himself small, to avoid the wrong gaze, to survive the walk from school without trouble. But trouble found him anyway. He was 15 the first time he felt handcuffs. Wrong place, wrong time. The cops swarmed a group of boys after a robbery downtown. Darius had been walking home from a tutoring session, algebra book still in hand. It did not matter. A shove, a knee in the back, the cold steel of judgment against his wrists. They never asked his name. He spent the night in a holding cell with urine-stained walls and eyes that never blinked. In the morning, they let him go. Mistaken identity, they said. But something had changed. He had seen the truth, that the system did not care about truth. He watched his friends fall, one by one, to the weight of that truth. Some joined gangs. Some just disappeared. A few made it out. Darius made a choice. He would not escape. He would infiltrate. Years later, he stood on the training ground of Quantico, surrounded by recruits who looked nothing like him, who whispered behind his back, who asked if he got in because of the numbers. He did not flinch, not when they doubted his strength, his discipline, his right to wear the badge. He earned it anyway. His mentors warned him, "Do not get too emotional about the job. You are here to enforce the law, not change it." But Darius remembered his mother, crying when she thought he was asleep. He remembered the feeling of cold tile beneath his face. He remembered silence. And he promised he would never be silent again. By 28, he had become one of the youngest field agents in the Bureau's Public Corruption Task Force, a shadow in the courtroom halls, a quiet presence in the records rooms. He did not speak much, but when he did, people listened. His latest assignment brought him back home. A judge named Raymond Harlan had ruled over the city's lower courts for more than a decade, respected in public, ruthless in chambers. The kind of man who could smile on the news at 6 and throw away a teenager's future at 9. There were whispers, deals traded in back rooms, sentences stretched to benefit private prisons, a quiet hunger for power, fed by the silence of those too afraid to speak. But whispers were not enough. The Bureau needed proof, real proof, and they needed someone who could walk into that courtroom and be invisible, someone the judge would underestimate. Darius did not hesitate. He let his beard grow in, wore the scuffed sneakers he had once been ashamed of, carried no ID, no lawyer, just a fake name and a fabricated charge. Misdemeanor assault, low priority, just another face in the crowd. To anyone watching, he was a stereotype, and that was the point. The night before his first hearing, Darius sat alone in a motel room lit by the flicker of a dying bulb. He ran through the plan again. The bugs were planted. His mic was working. Backup was on standby. But still, his hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury. Because this was not just a mission. This was memory. This was the past knocking on his chest. He pulled out a photo from his wallet, creased at the edges curling. It was of his mother and him on his high school graduation day. She was smiling, holding him like he was the last precious thing in the world. He closed his eyes. This is for every boy they never saw. The next morning, Darius walked into the courthouse with nothing but a hoodie, a fake name, and the truth buried deep in his chest. The bailiff barely looked at him. The clerk called him son. The public defender scribbled his name like it was already forgotten. And from a high bench, Judge Harlan looked down, like he always did, and smirked. The first words he spoke would be burned into Darius's memory forever. Well, look who finally made time to join us. Another future felon, I presume? Laughter. Quiet, sharp, cruel. Darius said nothing. But inside, he was already watching, already recording, and already deciding how this story would end. Darius sat in the defendant's seat like he had 100 times before, only never like this. This time, the weight on his back was not just the eyes of a courtroom. It was the eyes of history. He had worn wiretaps, staked out drug houses, and followed murder suspects through alleys. But nothing in his career prepared him for the rage that boiled under his skin when a system looked him in the face and still refused to see him. Judge Harlan adjusted his robe as if it were armor. His gavel tapped lazily, not to silence chaos, but to claim control. Darius Miller, he said, reading from the charge sheet with a tone soaked in disdain. Assault and battery. Public disturbance. No identification. No employer. No fixed address. He looked up, color me shocked. A few muffled laughs. The bailiff smirked. Darius stayed perfectly still. The public defender did not look at him once. She fumbled through her briefcase like she had already given up. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty and requests a bail hearing. Judge Harlan leaned forward. On what grounds? This young man seems determined to cause trouble and contribute nothing. No prior record, she offered weakly, and no history of flight risk. The judge raised an eyebrow. No history, huh? That is because he probably has never been caught. He slammed his gavel. Bail is set at $25,000. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. That was nearly triple the usual for the charge. The public defender opened her mouth, but Judge Harlan cut her off. Next case. Darius was led away, shackles clinking. He said nothing, but his ears were wide open. The holding cell was cold, louder than the courtroom. Concrete walls, rusted bars, voices layered in pain and sarcasm. A man in the corner leaned in toward Darius. You fresh? Don't look like you from here. Darius studied him. Mid-30s, calloused hands, a scar under his left eye, smart eyes trying to hide behind street rhythm. Grew up not far, Darius answered. The man chuckled. Then you know, once you in front of Harlan, it is already over. He do not see people. He sees problems to bury. A second man joined in. Had a buddy, got 6 months for loitering. Judge said he looked like he was planning something. The first added, you know that dude who beat a cop last month? White kid, walked out on probation. Darius nodded slowly. He already knew. The Bureau had shown him case files. Patterns, charts, but now he was breathing it, smelling it. The rot was real. He kept his responses short, careful not to give too much. These men did not know who he really was, and for their own safety, they never would. Back in the courtroom the next day, the second hearing came faster than expected. Darius's charges were already being escalated. The judge cited a lack of cooperation and hinted at additional time if a plea was not entered soon. But Darius was not here to plead. He was watching. The courtroom clerk passed a note to the bailiff. Harmless to most. But Darius had seen the same handwriting in a previous tip. The one linking Harlan to a known land developer accused of buying court decisions. Later that day, during recess, Judge Harlan held a closed-door meeting in his chambers. The developer, Ernest Malone, stepped inside. Tall, too smooth, gold cufflinks. They shook hands like they had done this many times before. Darius stood in the hallway, appearing to wait for his lawyer. But his mic was live, recording every word through the cheap drywall. I need that lot cleared, Malone said. Eviction orders. 2 weeks. Harlan sipped his coffee. Tell me why I should care. I doubled the offer. A pause. Harlan. Now you are speaking my language. Darius's hands curled into fists in his pocket. That night, Darius called his FBI contact from a burner phone in a nearby alley. Agent Laura McKenna picked up. Calm, efficient, a voice that saved his life more than once. We are running out of time, she said. You have confirmation? I have audio of a deal, he replied. Cash for eviction orders. He is leveraging the bench. We need more. Financial trail. Patterns. Make it stick. Otherwise, it is his word against yours. Darius leaned against the brick wall, tired. He is escalating the pressure. Next hearing, he wants me to plea out. He is going to push harder. McKenna's voice was firm. Then let him. He looked down at the badge hidden beneath his shirt. I am close, he said quietly. Let him think he is winning. The next morning, Darius entered the courtroom with slower steps. He saw the judge, the clerk, the bailiff, all smiling, all comfortable. They had no idea what was coming. And that was exactly the way he wanted it. The holding cell was colder the second night, not in temperature, but in truth. Darius lay flat on the metal bench, staring at the cracked ceiling, the sounds of breathing, pacing, coughing all blurred into a low hum until they did not, until it became something else. A question. How many innocent people have slept here before me? The thought would not leave him. In the bunk below, a teenager, barely 17, whispered into the dark, I didn't even do it, man. They just needed someone to blame. Darius closed his eyes. He had heard that same whisper when he was 15. Different voice. Same weight. He sat up. You got family? He asked quietly. The kid nodded, sniffling. My grandma. She said pray about it. And you believe in that? A pause. I used to. The silence after that felt like mourning, not for one person, but for a generation. Hours later, back in the courtroom hallway, Darius walked with his hands cuffed, 2 guards trailing behind. But his mind was moving faster than ever. The game was shifting. He had seen the pattern before. It always started the same way. A judge hungry for control, a greedy developer, a desperate city, and somewhere, buried under the paperwork, real lives were shattered for profit. But this time, Darius was on the inside. He had spent years preparing for this moment. And still, it felt personal in a way that training manuals never covered. He passed a janitor in the hall, a black man in his 50s who glanced at him with something between pity and recognition. Darius met his eyes. They do not see us until we make them. That afternoon, Judge Harlan met Malone again, this time not in chambers, but in a side lot behind the courthouse. Darius had planted a directional mic on the fire escape the night before. Their voices came through clear. I need those files moved, Harlan muttered. Do not leave a trail. You're getting nervous, Malone teased. Relax. No one's watching. Darius smirked, listening from a parked surveillance van nearby. That's where you're wrong. Back at headquarters, Agent McKenna reviewed the audio. It's solid, she said, eyes narrowing. But we still need to tie it to sentencing records. The feds will not move unless it's airtight. Darius rubbed the bridge of his nose. I need another day in that courtroom. McKenna hesitated. They are pushing you. You know what Harlan's doing, right? He is stacking the pressure to force you into a mistake. That is the plan, Darius said. Let him. The next morning, everything felt off. Darius was awoken early, escorted through side halls, and brought into a courtroom already half-filled. No time to speak to his lawyer. No chance to prepare. Judge Harlan smiled thinly from the bench. We are moving things along today. New evidence came in. We may be upgrading the charges. Darius's public defender looked as surprised as he did, but she said nothing. The judge leaned in. This is what happens when you fight back. You will learn that soon. Darius kept his face still, but his jaw locked. The game was ending. Soon, during recess, Darius was escorted back to the holding area. But this time he caught sight of the young court clerk slipping a document into her bag. Separate from the rest. Something small. Something she was not supposed to take. He memorized her badge number. Later, he would match her handwriting to forge financial waivers tied to Malone's shell companies. She had been helping him hide trails for over a year. But in that moment, all he saw was a flicker of fear in her eyes. She was not a villain. She was trapped, just like everyone else. That evening, Darius sat once more under flickering motel lights. This time, he did not study audio. He studied himself. He stood before the cracked mirror and pulled out the badge. held it like a question. Was it enough? Would this truly change anything? He thought about the teenager in the cell, about his mother working night shifts, about the time he had walked home in the rain, wrists sore from cuffs he never deserved. He whispered aloud to no one, "If they want to make an example out of me, fine. But I get to speak first." At dawn, he dressed in silence, not in a suit, not in a disguise. He put the hoodie back on, the one they mocked, the one that made them judge him before he ever spoke. He looked at his reflection, shoulders square. This time, he was not walking in to observe. He was walking in to change everything. Courtroom 3B buzzed with quiet tension as Darius stepped inside. He wore the same hoodie, same worn sneakers, same calm stare. To everyone else, he looked no different from the last time he stood there. But something in the air had shifted. The bailiff glanced at him with that usual mix of boredom and bias. The clerk barely looked up. His public defender fumbled with her files, lips pressed into a flat line. And at the center of it all, seated high behind his polished desk, was Judge Raymond Harlan. Calm, confident, smug. "Mr. Miller," he said, voice slick, "you are back. What a surprise. Perhaps today you will be ready to stop wasting my time." Darius said nothing. He simply stood, eyes focused, like he had been preparing for this moment all his life. The judge shuffled through his paperwork, then leaned forward. "Here is what we are offering," he said, tapping a folder. "Simple plea deal. You take 12 months, suspended, 6 months probation, and you walk out of here with a slap on the wrist." He smiled as if he were doing Darius a favor. "I suggest you take it, before the charges get heavier." The courtroom was quiet, waiting. Darius's defender turned to him, whispering, "Just take the deal. We are lucky he is offering this." But Darius did not move. Not yet. He let the silence settle, let it breathe. Then, slowly, he took one step forward. His chains had been removed this time. It was the first thing he had requested. He looked up at the judge, not as a criminal, not as a victim, but as a man with nothing left to lose. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "before I answer, I have something I would like to show you." The judge raised an eyebrow, irritated. "This is highly irregular." "It will only take a moment," Darius replied. From his hoodie pocket, he pulled something small and metallic. Several people gasped. The bailiff stepped forward. "Hold it right." But Darius had already raised it into the light. A golden badge. FBI. Time stopped. The laughter from the gallery froze in their throats. The clerk's pen slipped from her fingers. The bailiff backed away, stunned. The judge blinked, lips parting, but no sound came. Darius took a deep breath, his voice steady. "My name is Special Agent Darius Cole, badge number 31762. I have been working undercover as part of federal investigation into judicial corruption, bribery, and civil rights violations carried out by this court." He turned slightly, letting the room absorb it. "I have collected audio recordings, financial trails, and direct testimony confirming that Judge Harlan has accepted bribes in exchange for rulings, particularly targeting young black and brown men for inflated sentences and false charges." He looked at the judge again. "And I am here today to bring those facts to light." From the back of the courtroom, several individuals rose to their feet, 2 men and a woman dressed in plain suits. They flashed their own badges. Department of Justice. The lead agent stepped forward. "Judge Raymond Harlan, you are under federal investigation. Please step down from the bench." The room erupted. Reporters, previously invisible, rushed to the front. Phones clicked. Shouts rang out. The judge stood defiant. "This is absurd. You cannot be serious. This boy is a criminal. He tricked the entire court." Darius stepped closer. "No," he said, voice like stone. "I showed you who I was. You just refused to look." The judge pointed a shaking finger. "This is entrapment. I will not be ruined by some thug in a hoodie." And that was when the court clerk, her hands trembling, stood up from her seat. "He is telling the truth," she said. I helped falsify documents. Under orders. I was afraid to speak." All eyes turned to her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she did not back down. "I thought I had no choice," she whispered. The judge stared at her in disbelief, jaw slack. Darius watched as the agents moved in. Cuffs clicked around the very wrists that had once sentenced hundreds without blinking. For a moment, the only sound was the heavy breathing of a man watching his empire collapse. As Judge Harlan was escorted away, shouting obscenities, Darius remained still. He looked around the courtroom, at the people, the space, the echo of what it once represented. And then he walked out through the front doors, head held high, no chains, no shame, only purpose. The courthouse doors slammed shut behind Judge Harlan, but the echoes of what had just happened rang through every hallway, every whisper, every breath. Inside courtroom 3B, no one moved. The weight of what they had witnessed was still sinking in. The courtroom, the same place where fear had ruled unchallenged for years, was now stunned into silence. Darius stood alone at the center, not just as a man, not just as an agent, but as the spark that cracked something wide open. But it was not over. Not yet. Outside, a wall of reporters gathered like a rising tide. Cameras clicked. Questions flew. "Agent Cole, how long was the operation? Is this the first judge being investigated? Were any other officials involved?" Darius said nothing. His job was not finished, not until the full case was made. Back in a private conference room on the second floor, he laid out the evidence for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Audio recordings, bribery logs, screenshots of backdoor messages between Harlan and developers. He played the tape of Harlan's voice, the one from the courthouse alley. Double the offer. "Now you're speaking my language." The prosecutors nodded grimly. Every piece matched. The pattern was undeniable. Still, one of them leaned forward, skeptical. "You are asking us to bring down a tenured judge based on secret recordings and testimonies from scared clerks." Darius stared at him. "No," he said. "I am asking you to bring down a man who sold freedom like it was real estate." A quiet beat passed. The prosecutor folded his hands. "We will move forward, but we will need more than one case. We need a wave." By evening, the courthouse was crawling with federal officers. Boxes were carried out, computers seized. Harlan's chambers were stripped clean. And still, Darius was not done. He returned to the holding area, not in cuffs, not undercover, but as an agent of the law. He walked past the same rusted bars, the same cracked floor. In the last cell, he found the teenager from the night before, eyes wide, stunned to see him. "You?" the boy whispered. "You're FBI?" Darius nodded. "I thought you were like us," the boy said. "I am," Darius answered. "That's why I'm here." He handed him a card. "You're going to get a new public defender. A real one. We are reviewing every case Harlan touched." Tears formed in the boy's eyes, but he blinked them back. Darius reached through the bars and shook his hand. "You're not invisible," he said softly. "You were never invisible." The next morning, news anchors led with the story. Federal judge arrested for corruption in shocking sting operation. FBI agent poses as defendant to expose systemic bias. The footage played on every screen, from bus stops to barbershops to breakfast tables. People watched, some in disbelief, some in silence, and some in tears. But not everyone celebrated. A group of city officials met in a closed-door session. They spoke in hushed tones, about fallout, about what else might come out. "He took down Harlan," one said. "What happens when he starts pulling on more threads?" Another shook their head. "He is not just after one man. He is after the whole machine." And they were right. Darius knew this was not the end. It was the entrance. That afternoon, Darius returned to the courthouse once more. This time, not as a defendant, not as an agent, but as a witness. He testified before a federal grand jury, laying out every detail of the sting operation. The hidden meetings, the clerk's confession, the audio trail, the plea deal bait, the system built on fear and silence. His voice was calm, certain, but underneath, the emotion burned hot. "This is not just about one man," he told the jurors. "It is about how power survives when no one is watching. It is about the voices that were ignored because they did not wear a badge or a tie, or a smile white enough to make people comfortable. The room was silent. A juror nodded, slowly, and the tide turned. When Darius finally stepped outside that evening, he paused on the courthouse steps. Sunlight was beginning to fall over the city, casting long shadows behind him, where the system had always tried to keep people like him. He stood for a long time, watching, not the reporters, not the officials, but the people. A crowd had gathered, strangers, onlookers, former defendants, mothers, students, men who had once stood in that courtroom, silenced by fear. One of them stepped forward, an older man, wrinkled hands, gray at the temples. He placed a hand on Darius's shoulder. "You did what no one else could." Darius looked him in the eyes. "No," he said quietly. "I just did what everyone else deserved." The storm had passed, but in its wake, the silence was louder than ever. Judge Harlan was now awaiting trial in federal custody, charged with multiple counts of bribery, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. His name, once spoken with fear, now echoed with disgrace. The news cycle shifted, but the ripples remained. Old cases began to reopen. Defense attorneys, once silenced by fear or futility, now flooded the court with appeals. One by one, young men, some barely out of childhood, were pulled from the cracks they had been buried in. Some walked free. Others were granted new hearings. But for each one, a new question emerged. How many more had no one to speak for them? Darius moved through it all quietly. No press interviews. No victory laps. Just the work. He stood in back rooms with federal investigators reviewing sentence logs. He sat with terrified court clerks, their eyes red, their hands shaking as they signed statements. He held meetings with advocacy groups, promising access, transparency, reform. The badge on his chest was no longer just a symbol of law. It was a torch in the dark. A week later, he returned to prison, not undercover, not in chains. This time, he entered with clearance, purpose, and a list of names, cases that needed review, stories that needed hearing. The warden nodded at him respectfully, no longer just seeing another man in a hoodie. Now he saw something else. Darius walked past the same cell he had slept in just nights ago. The same teenager was still there, his case stalled in paperwork, but not forgotten. "You came back," the boy said, standing up hopeful. "I said I would," Darius replied. "They are reassigning your file. This time, someone is going to read it." The boy's lips trembled. He turned to the wall, wiping his eyes before anyone could see. Darius watched him for a moment longer, and then he moved on. That night, Darius sat in his childhood home, the hum of the old refrigerator buzzing in the background. His mother, Janice, placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat across the table, eyes full of questions. He handed her a folded article. She read the headline, blinked slowly. "You really did it." He smiled faintly. "Just one man. But not just one story," she said. "You made them look." They sat in silence for a moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "I used to worry every time you left this house," she whispered. "Not because I thought you would do something wrong, but because I knew the world would see you and never ask who you were." Darius looked at her, his voice low. "They still don't ask." "But now," she said, voice steady, "they have to listen." The next morning, Darius stood once more on the courthouse steps, watching the city wake. A new judge had been appointed. Reforms were already being discussed. There was movement, not enough, but more than there had ever been. He knew this fight was not over. This city was only one dot on the map. There were others, hundreds of others. And somewhere out there, another young man sat in another cell, staring at another wall, wondering if anyone saw him. Darius placed his badge inside his coat and pulled up his hood, not to hide, but to walk forward without apology, because now the world knew who he was, and more importantly, who he had always been. Evenings settled over the city like a soft gray curtain. Streetlights blinked on one by one, casting long shadows across pavement and benches. The courthouse behind him was quiet now, But Darius remained. He stood alone in a park just across the street. Hoodie up, hands tucked into his coat pockets. The wind rustled through the trees above, but he did not flinch. A soft voiceover began, low and steady. His voice, not the FBI agent, not the man in the courtroom, just Darius. They did not see me. Not really. They saw Hoodie, a file, a charge, a problem. They saw what they feared, what they wanted to control, what they never tried to understand. He looked down at the bench beside him. Someone had left a small candle burning at its base. Next to it sat a photo of a boy, maybe 16, smiling through a school portrait. One of the names on his appeal list. Darius bent down slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the frame. He closed his eyes. But I saw them. I saw what power does when no one is watching. I saw how justice breaks when it becomes routine. I saw silence dressed up like order. He stood, facing the city skyline. Headlights passed. People walked. The world kept moving. But something had changed. Something small. Something real. They told me to stay quiet, to do the job, and not get too emotional. But I carry every name, every number, every file stamped guilty without care. I carry them because they deserve to be carried. From across the park, a little girl laughed, chasing after her father. Her hair flew wild behind her, bright against a fading sky. Darius watched them for a long time, and then he turned. For the first time, he looked directly into the camera. Into us. Eyes sharp, heart wide open. So now, I watch back. Not because I want revenge. Not because I need to win. But because someone has to see what they never want to look at. And I will never look away again. He stepped forward, the camera slowly pulling back. One man walking to the middle of the quiet city. Hood up, back straight, hands steady. No fanfare. No spotlight. Just a promise.